Welcome to the Misophonia Podcast. This is Season 6, Episode 14. My name is Adil Ahmad, and I have misophonia. Hope everyone has had a manageable Thanksgiving this week here in America. In terms of triggers, I know it's a tough holiday here for many of us. Maybe this week's episode can provide some escape. It's another long one following the previous episode and similarly intense. There's a lot of ground we cover, and I don't want to give too much away, but suffice to say Eric had a pretty unique and difficult childhood growing up. As you'll hear, he was always taken care of by his parents, but as days progressed to evening, there was often alcohol abuse and some pretty disturbing mental illness in his parents that would slowly reveal themselves. This was naturally very confusing for a child and led to many of the issues that Eric has experienced since then. And he's actually only relatively recently, seeked out therapy. We get into all of that. We talk about chronic versus singular trauma, going from a therapy novice to now being very proactive, and some uplifting messages about connecting with others and making yourself heard. Eric reached out sometime after the interview as well, wanting to talk more about specific therapies he's worked on. So expect a part 2 episode in the new year. As always, let me know what you think. You can reach out by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast. And as a reminder, do leave a quick rating or review wherever you listen to this show. It really helps move us up in the algorithms and reach more misophones. Thank you for your incredible ongoing support, Patreon supporters. If you feel like contributing there, you can read all about it at patreon.com/misophonia podcast. All right, now here's my conversation with Eric. All right, so Eric, welcome to the podcast. I've been looking forward to this a lot. Yeah, good to have you here. You just to kind of start off simple, like where are you located? Kind of and a little bit about what you do, but I'm sure we'll get into that in relation to misophonia.
Yeah, sure. Well, ironically enough, I work at a very noisy job. I'm a machinist. And so I work around...
It could be a good noise. Yeah, it could be good noise.
So I work around loud noises constantly, and I'm wearing headphones constantly,
right?
Which a lot of your listeners can probably relate to.
Oh, yeah.
But, the funny thing about the miso that I've learned is it's an environment where it doesn't bother me at all. Like, I'm making the noise.
Right. You're in control.
I'm in control, and of course, a lot of us with this strange thing know that it kind of screws with your control issues.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I know that that's kind of at the heart of a lot of my issues is feeling out of control,
right.
And there's some kind of fear wrapped up in it.
Right.
But yeah, I work as a machinist, and I make things all day. And
are you working by yourself in that environment, or are there other people around also making noise? Or
well, fortunately, I have my own kind of insular compartment, my own little workspace,
nice.
Which helps that a lot.
Yeah.
So I can select the music. I can, any loud noise I make in there is me.
Right.
Yeah, but like what I wrote in my notes to you, like my specific triggers really come from kind of thuds and banging, and often doors is a huge one. Sorry, I'm kind of rambling, but
no, I love rambling.
I know I've listened to enough where I should not put pressure on myself, but so really I learned the word miso for the first time, misophonia, only a couple years ago. And I know that a lot of the listeners can kind of empathize, where once they kind of tracked down a name for whatever this is, kind of this amorphous, weird, terrible condition, and actually found a name and found your awesome podcast and found some fellowship and some, because a lot of it is really feeling utterly alone and misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to make some, in addition to my typed notes, I was making shorthand notes for myself, but a lot of my issues have always come with kind of measuring what I'm going through with sound triggers versus what quote unquote normal people experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you get into some weird gray areas there where, you know, and I'll use just air quote normal whenever I say it.
Right.
Because
Right.
really
Right.
there isn't any normal in this world that that I'm
Right.
really
Right.
aware of. But people who have kind of traditional triggers that aren't, so traumatic, they'll hear like a door slam and, well, that's annoying. Or
Yeah.
they're, a neighbor will play loud music and, God, that's a little bit annoying. And that's kind of where my wife is at, where with a lot of this stuff where, yes, that's annoying. And then
Right.
if you ask her about it in an hour, she forgot all about it. It's in
Right.
the moment, it's regulated, it's kind of processed properly, or in a more healthy way. Whereas if I hear it a month later, I'm ruminating on it and gnawing on it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the difference where, and from the outside, particularly with my childhood, where I learned to suppress a lot of trauma and kind of mask it and use the freeze feign response in the wonderful flight, fight,
Yeah.
freeze,
Yeah.
feign. Often, when you're a little kid and you're faced with trauma, you don't know how to fight back or contend with things. So you either try to make peace or you just kind of shut down. And I came up with kind of a combination of those two things due to kind of my family situation and the drinking and the fighting and all that kind of stuff. And it was kind of chronic,
Mm-hmm.
which is another kind of really tragic thing, and it's harder to get over when things are chronic because if you're in a car crash, obviously that's awful and terrible.
Right. Right.
But,
Right. Right.
but you have the one singular event to kind of go back to, contend with, and maybe build some context around.
Get some distance from to yeah.
Yeah. Whereas if you have a lot of trauma kind of dosed out, particularly when you're young and your brain's developing,
Yep.
that gets into some weird territory where that's all you have as context is just weirdness and that kind of stuff. So I think my miso triggers fall under that, where for the longest time I didn't even think about it as something that was troubling, even though it was, but I didn't tag it as such. If that
Yeah, no. So actually, I was going to ask you before we then dive into your past, like before you knew it
Yeah,
had
we're
a
going
name.
right in, but
Yeah, yeah. No, before you knew it had a name, like obviously, and I think the listeners will understand when we get into your background. Like,
yeah.
obviously, it was a big deal for you. How did you describe it to yourself? Like, or what did you think of yourself?
So I wouldn't even. It was hard to even kind of conceptualize. It was all
Mm-hmm.
through my nervous system. So
Mm-hmm.
when I would hear these traumatic sounds, the slamming doors, the music in another room is a huge trigger.
Right.
Um, Real abrupt banging, slamming, argument based type of stuff. I would experience it, if that makes sense. I wouldn't really think, God, something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm overreacting to this, that type of thing, because I never had the outside context. Later I did when I was more in middle school, high school, and I started socializing more, staying at friends' houses where
Mm-hmm.
their parents weren't drinking and
Mm-hmm.
arguing all
Mm-hmm.
the time. And, I could sleep through the night without, at 2 or 3 in the morning, suddenly some craziness starting up.
Right.
And so that's when I started to kind of piece together that, maybe something is really wrong. Everything was so gradual and so chronic that it kind of
Mm-hmm.
occurred to me, but by then I was so kind of ashamed of it all, and I do, when you're middle school, high school, you want to fit in.
You're right.
You don't
Yeah.
want to talk to
Yeah. Yeah.
people about, well, my home life is just crazy. And so I just wouldn't really even bring it up. And so
Yeah.
it was kind of a denial that kind of became an inner denial as well. Like my nervous system knew something was wrong, but I didn't have a language to describe it. I didn't have a context.
How did you, because, I've been reading about the nervous system also actually relatively recently, too long after I actually even know what misophonia was. Did you know about the nervous system and how, were you talking to somebody? Like, who told you about, was that also a recent thing for you or?
This is all real recent.
Okay. Okay.
This was I'm 50 now, and I only became aware of all this stuff in my 40s,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is a
Me
bit
too.
late.
Yeah.
It's me. I mean, it's my life, and that's how it worked out. But you know, at least I learned about it. Period.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
a lot of folks don't. You have to have a language. You have to have a context, and
Hmm.
it just, part of it was my family had mental illness in the family, and we also had a very, I'll just call it old school, a code of silence about it,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it was kind of non-verbally, and sometimes verbally, kind of enforced that you don't talk about this
Hmm.
stuff ever. Um, so that's why my parents were both heavy drinkers and both had mental illness. Neither of them got help for it, and part of that was probably had to do with the substance abuse. Part of it probably
Hmm.
had to do with a lot of this traumatic stuff I was experiencing was in the 70s and the 80s, which
Yeah.
is a which is a
Yeah.
different universe,
Right.
and especially in terms of awareness of mental health. We didn't have podcasts, and we sure didn't have a specific misophonia podcast with 5 or 6 seasons worth of people
Right.
testifying about it. So
Right. Yeah.
back
Or
then,
social media, or just kind
or
of, yeah,
social
just like
media.
sharing articles, which is how a lot of us learned about the New York Times article back in the day, or however it is now. Kelly Ripa wasn't around. I've talked to people from who are, in the 70s and 80s, and talking about, just it was brutal back in the 50s and 60s, because yeah, none of the, like, at least after the 60s, you had some, trying to think about some social issues, but yeah, I mean, 80s and before, it was really like you had to suck it up, or
Suck it up. Yeah, it's
so.
really interesting now that I've hit this 50-year-old mark,
Hmm.
and at work I interact with younger folks and millennials, and just talking about our different this
Yeah.
world, this alien
Yeah.
planet I come from called 1971 when I was born, and you had your immediate circle of friends, you had three TV stations, maybe, and and public access,
Right.
and you had the radio, and you had magazines and books, and I never, you know, and this is kind of the tragic part of it, I never had an outside kind of adult presence to provide the context that this is this is wrong,
Yeah.
family situation is wrong.
You had no
I just
confidant, or no mentor, or no, uh, yeah, family friend or something that could give you that context, like
yeah,
that smart cool uncle kind of thing, or whatever.
yeah. So I
Yeah.
just kind of and once I got out of the house, I started living my life and kind of burying any of those.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
had kind of denied or just kind of diluted them to myself,
Hmm.
to the point where I just lived with them. I mean, it's
Yeah.
really strange to think about now, and how I made it this far, and put myself through school, and I've always had a job, and but have been hauling around these issues,
Hmm.
this invisible bag of misophonia and trauma and stuff,
Yeah.
just carrying it around. Um, so really, but to go back to your question, I only started learning about, like, my nervous system as it pertains to my emotions and traumatic memories and that type of stuff. I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago, when I started seeing a therapist.
Oh, that's when you
Be-
started, just like 5 or 6 years ago, just for any reason.
Yeah. Well,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I started really having like kind of nervous breakdowns, really, for a variety of reasons. Like my
Yeah.
parents died and just interpersonal stuff, and it all kind of like you can only get away with ignoring your mental health for so long.
hmm It catches
It
up with
is
you.
it
Yeah.
does.
Because I think it weakens your nervous system or whatever to a point where something can it's easier for you to maybe go over the edge and
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It softens you up, and in my case I started getting, like your physical constitution, your mental constitution, you can't take as much. You need to you can't. I feel like I devoted a lot of mental strength to suppressing trauma or just
Mm,
holding it or living with it and that kind of stuff. And you get older and you just start, I can't do it.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and stuff starts to break in. And so finally I started cracking up, honestly. And for the first time in my life, I just came to a point where like I've got to do something.
Yeah.
I need, those magic words, I need help, which I'd never used ever.
Well, I
And
think
start,
people, yeah, and start going to see a therapist and trying
yeah.
to trying to talk. And so was it? Oh, and were you see? Was it what type of therapy was it? Was it like CBT? Was talk therapy or anything else more exotic
So,
or?
yeah, so I started just going to a talk therapist. And I
Mhm.
really didn't even know what I was doing.
What you
Yeah.
can expect? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I was a complete, absolute beginner with this stuff. Just getting to the point where I could finally say, I need help was okay, that's huge. But now
yeah.
what? Who do I had, again, the word context keeps coming back up, but I had no context. So I would get on my insurance through my work. I would
Right.
go to the list of, well, who's on the list that I can go see, and well, she looks like she has a nice kind face. I'll go see her. That was my criteria. And
And you didn't
so
look for anything particular, like, because you're a beginner, you didn't look for anything particular, like, I don't know. Well, certainly not misophonia, but any particular experience that they were or
yeah,
specialty.
I kind of looked for anxiety, and I just
Okay.
knew that I have anxiety mixed with some really heavy depression, and
Hmm.
that was kind of those were the two keywords. And I would just scroll through faces and see those two words highlighted, and well, she's in my neighborhood, and I can,
Right. Right.
So I
Right.
started very practically, and so I went to one therapist who was strictly talk therapy,
Hmm.
and we did a few sessions, and even after those few sessions, I could tell that it wasn't quite what I needed, and I wasn't sure why,
Yeah.
but we just kept talking and talking, and I started uncovering some really bad memories
That you had forgotten about,
that that
or
I
that you.
that I had that were so gauzy and so kind of detached from the impact that they actually had on my nervous system
Hmm.
that it was really a kind of a form of detachment.
Mm.
But the talk therapy started to help me contextualize, the and I think this first therapist I went to was actually a pretty skilled therapist because she started to kind of dial in on a few things. And of course, I was very evasive about those things. And, this took me a long time because I've been doing therapy for 6 years, 5 or 6
Right.
years now.
Right. Right.
And I've learned that it's kind of a skill in itself to go to
Hmm.
therapy and to
Hmm.
allow it to work because at first I was just really proud of myself that I went.
Yeah.
Okay, I went
Yeah.
to a therapist. I guess I'm better. If that makes
Right.
sense. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. No.
I'm going to therapy, so
Yeah.
I've got to
Check.
be
Yeah.
checked.
Right.
Um, but you have to. It's really only as good as you're able to give and as
Do the work,
vulnerable.
as someone told me in a recent interview. Yeah, you got to do the
Exactly.
work.
And so I really had to learn a lot of really difficult lessons, and one was to stop pushing back so much. Um, but I went to several therapists, and then I kind of learned kind of more what I needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I knew that I had certain memories and certain triggers, and a lot of them, which is why I'm here, were sound related.
Yeah.
And then I started to kind of refine my search, and then I found this sensio-motor therapist, and
Okay.
I'd never heard this word before in my life. Like, I don't know, but I read her blurb, where it's somatic triggers, and it's kind of talk and body based, which sounded
Mm-hmm.
very intriguing to me. And I knew
Mm-hmm.
I needed more than talk.
Mm-hmm.
Something
Mm-hmm.
inside of me was telling me, well, talk is not enough. And so I started seeing the woman who I currently see, and she is a super skilled talk therapist. So I kind of rehashed my childhood and my adolescence and all this kind of stuff. And she would just sit there and then fish for words. And she was very almost creepily observant, where she would
Mm-hmm.
just sit and then she'd look at my feet and look at my hands. And I'd be in the middle of a story, and she would, and this was different than the other therapists, where
Mm.
they were strictly up in the mind. Like it's
Yeah.
just it's a dialogue, which is good, and that's great for some people. But this particular therapist would look at my feet, like, what's going on with your feet, or what's going on with your hand, and I would say, what does that have to do with anything? And
Right.
it's like, well, let's focus on your hand. Like, what's it doing there? Every time you say the word, door or something like that, your hand seems to start doing
Oh,
something.
interesting.
And so she started collecting like clues and hooks and kind of these body cues that I was giving
Yeah.
off that I had zero awareness of. None.
Right. Right.
Really.
Yeah.
Uh, and
Yeah.
again, it's very strange to think about, but, and then over time and over the various sessions, we would start really focusing on, okay, what's going on with your leg? It's really bouncing. And then it got into this really hyper aware memory stuff. And so I would say, well, I'm thinking about my childhood. And then she would say, well, yeah, everything would start uh, macro and then work micro.
Mm-hmm.
Well, childhood. Well, about what age? Well, I don't know, 10 years old.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, where were you living? Blah, blah, blah. And just winnowing it down until we would get to the specific events. So she was kind of slowly picking her way through the chronic stuff, since I couldn't point to one particular event. Like, well, the car crashed, or, well, a stranger attacked me.
Right.
Mine
Right.
was
Right. Right.
just, well, a few times a month, the family would completely disintegrate for my entire life. So, it's the wallpaper of life.
Mm.
So she had to kind of pick her way through that and pick through my defenses, because obviously I don't want to talk about this stuff.
Right. Right. Right.
And I've been, I'm a macho guy, and uh, I don't need help and all that kind of crap. She just very patiently waded through all that stuff until eventually we would get to, you know, like a memory, for example. It's like, well, it's 2 a.m. in the morning and I hear a door slamming. And then as we really winnowed it down, I would, my, my nervous system, my reactions would become more isolated and more extreme,
Okay.
because she was able to really kind of put me in a bit of a time machine and not just have it be this amorphous, well, I hate the sound of slamming doors. And this took months and months of work.
Yeah.
But we would then focus on a particular point in time. Well, how does that make you feel? Well, it makes me feel terrified and surprised. Well, what does that mean? In your body. Is it your heart? Is it your breathing? is it your leg bouncing up and down uncontrollably because you
Yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah,
So, and then it became very isolated. And this was all very unpleasant, by the way, because who wants to relive their
right,
misophonia when
right,
they're not? I mean, you kind of do anyway when you're anticipating, the next,
right.
the
And just
next,
pure anxiety. Yeah, yeah,
which is just awful, awful. And I, a lot of my childhood was anticipating and becoming very hyper
right.
vigilant and waiting and
When it's chronic, yeah, I mean, you don't know when it's gonna, you know, it's gonna happen again. It's
yeah.
just a matter of looking for when, or your
Hmm.
your 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 nervous system has learned that it's gonna happen again, and it needs to protect you.
Yeah, and it's what do you call it when something is confirmed? Not self fulfilling prophecy, but it's basically I would kind of reject any positive evidence. I would only gravitate to see it happened
Is it
again.
like a confirmation bias or something like
Thank you.
that? Or yeah,
Yeah, confirmation bias. So I got into that really insidious loop of see uh, every time and then it becomes that.
I think a lot of us listening are probably very familiar with that. It's like if we can, we see somebody maybe eat something, and then we're like, yeah, or just they're ordering some food, and then you're already like, oh yeah, it's gonna sound terrible, and then when you hear it, yeah, you
You're
tell yourself, yes, 100% of the time I'm right.
you're
And
you're primed for it at all times,
yeah,
and because I can remember particularly with chewing and voices are also some of my triggers, and
yeah,
a lot of the stuff, yeah, I kind of just lived with, and then it would. I think I wrote you in my notes that this stuff really hit ahead a couple of years ago.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Um, and again, it was another set of trauma related triggers that had kind of not exactly laid dormant, but they were ready to explode. And it's I was already so stressed out about other stuff
mm-hmm,
that my bandwidth could not handle anymore. And so when I would hear my neighbors, which
yeah,
always bothered me, but it always bothered me. But then it went to this different place of just absolute like murderous rage when
yeah,
I would
yeah,
hear it. And then again, we get into what's normal because like a slamming door is something a lot of people live with. Like a lot of people live in apartments or they have roommates or whatever, and it's something you put up with. But for me, if I heard a door slamming way down the hall, it would drive me absolutely bananas. To the point where I spent a couple $100 buying acoustic panels and just taping them to our front door
mm-hmm,
to
mm-hmm,
absorb this the
yeah,
sound from the hall. It was
right.
getting to the point where I would get home from work and just immediately put on headphones and just tell my wife like I'm sorry but I can't. I, either this or we got to get out of here. So it would become flight stuff where often I would just say like I gotta go. I gotta go see a movie. Like, can we go to the
Mm-hmm,
park? I don't care.
mm-hmm,
Or it would be kind of internalized fight stuff where I just become so angry. How could these people be so thoughtless and so rude? And this is something that I hear practically in every podcast episode.
oh
It's
yeah.
just the outrage and the rage, and that's something that is hard to people who don't deal with sound triggers. It's hard to
It's hard to
understand
understand. It's hard to understand the level.
the
It's
level.
hard to understand that this what they consider something that they experience. It's hard for them to consider that being amplified to the point that we feel it, and so that's why you get the well, get over it, or
Okay,
just um, snap out of it kind of
snap
things.
out of
Even
it. Get over it. Toughen
yeah.
up.
Hmm. I've
Why
been
are
there.
you?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
no, you haven't. You haven't quite been there. It's a very different movie in my head.
It's
It's
really, yeah, there's such a gulf in experience there. And that's where you start feeling really alone. Like, am I crazy?
yeah.
Because and I would just hear like a neighbor, sometimes they would play legitimately loud music. Sometimes I would just barely hear it, but that
Hmm.
would be enough. Like it all became the same to me. And that's something I had kind of in early childhood as well. And I get into kind of these chicken and egg thoughts where did I have misophonia was when I was a kid, and then it dovetailed perfectly with a an upbringing that contained a lot of the triggers, because that's often what I feel like. Or did they create the triggers? I know it doesn't.
Unknown.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unknown, and there's so many unknowns with this stuff.
It seems like, yeah, it seems like I'm not a doctor, but it seems something epigenetic where we're probably, some of us are predisposed, and then this kind of just activates something that, if we had a different life, maybe we wouldn't have even, nothing would have happened, but we just happen to be predisposed. Whereas maybe if you had a sibling who was not somehow predisposed, they might not be affected as much. Or and I'm starting to go on a tangent, but like maybe they, other people, like we can experience things and the outcome is maybe in the direction of misophonia with somebody else. It can be something completely different, like bipolar, right? It's some other mental health condition, right?
Yeah,
Where
right.
it's not like there's no straight line necessarily here. And
Yeah,
so we just happen to be stuck with misophonia.
yes,
um and
definitely.
maybe some other things too, but
Yeah,
it's kind of a cloud of possible outcomes because we're messy wet brains. So
messy
um
wet brains. I like that a lot.
do
I
you
like that a lot.
I think people are probably kind of intrigued. I don't know how much you want to like describe like the past, but I'm sure
Yeah.
people by now are pretty intrigued as to like what was that. Speaking of context, like what kind of, in summary, like what were some of the things that were going on back then? I know you talked about like alcoholic parents and whatnot, but there's some other things that maybe I don't know how much you want to get into, or but
Yeah, well,
I don't know,
there
maybe
was
discuss some
definitely
of that.
yeah, sure. There's definitely a and none of this was ever diagnosed.
Hmm. Hmm.
None of this was ever, officially taken care of.
Yeah.
But it's entirely possible that my mom had a separate personality. And after she passed away, and this was years and years ago now, um, found some journals kind of written in the voice of another personality, and there were descriptions of blackouts and headaches and uh,
Yeah.
really some
Difficult stuff.
crazy,
Yeah.
really difficult stuff. And you're talking about if this is true. I mean, I can't say for sure,
Hmm.
but her behaviors would change because my mom during the day was the sweetest woman you ever knew. And as a sidebar, that this is what made my childhood so strange because a lot of it was so positive and so loving.
Yeah.
But there was this dark flip side where this other personality entity, not to
Yeah.
get supernatural, but that's what it felt like, particularly to a small kid, because this goes back as far as you as as far as I can remember. So you can imagine the confusion and the lack of trust I had
Hmm.
in the universe. I mean, when you're 5, 6, 7, and one of your folks turns into someone else, and this was like really different, distinct. It's very hard to describe. It's very spooky, but distinct way of talking and very aggressive and
Really.
thankfully not physically abusive, but
Yeah.
verbal abuse and just emotional abuse can be equally as scarring. Um, and so, and this was never really talked about. And my dad kind of, and they both drank to, later he was bipolar, and I think he had a lot of stuff that also went undiagnosed. a lot of this is a big mystery to me. Like I'll never know the full story.
So both of them are not with us
Yeah,
anymore, or
yeah, they
okay?
both passed on, which was just awful. Obviously, when
Yeah,
you lose both your
yeah.
parents, and I wanted to make sure to say like they whatever they were dealing with, they managed to bring me up. Always had a roof over my head, always had something to eat.
So you're right. It sounds like a lot of this was, not in their control, which is
Yeah,
even more tragic, is
yeah.
they were suffering just as much. I mean, in their own way.
And it's interesting because the older I get, and the more I learned how I've struggled with miso, with depression, with anxiety, and kind of whatever I deal with when those things meet. It I also feel like I don't have a lot of control. And
Hmm.
and if I grew up when they grew up, in the 50s and 60s, I think the 70s were weird. I mean, you were saying earlier, like they were from the Midwest, and they came from a different universe from when I grew up. So
I'm in the Midwest, and people are still talking about Snap Out of It. So
yeah,
I can't imagine what it would have been like back then. So yeah,
yeah. I mean, my mom, she grew up with the Minnesota Nice, and the
yeah, I see that all the time. Drives me
right,
crazy.
and so not really conducive to you saying, I'm really struggling with something. I need help.
Hmm.
They didn't know how to deal with it,
Hmm.
and so I
Hmm.
always keep that in mind. Like it, it gets into a very strange area where they did the best they could. I still have issues with how.
Yeah,
But with
yeah.
the substance abuse as well, the drinking, like I don't know how much control does a person have over that. Like I don't know.
So were they both? So it sounds like a lot of the late night door slamming and just the craziness. Would it be like your mom would just kind of like in the daytime be normal, and then as the sun, as the hours got later, it'd be kind of like a, I don't want to make fun of it, like a kind of a werewolf kind of, just kind of
No, it's
like it would just be
it's
just go
true.
just go down, and then she'd be like making all these throwing stuff. It sounds like slamming
Yeah,
doors.
so
Yeah.
so it would be where, and I would see her attitude start to change. And this wasn't
Hmm.
every night, but it was multiple times a month for
Okay. Okay.
as long as I can remember.
Okay.
And so it had regularity, but also it was a matter of, well, which night this month
So it
is it
had
going to be?
frequency, but it wasn't exact. It wasn't like clockwork. It was
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just
Okay.
to make it even more, crazy, more
Yeah.
surreal. Um, but essentially, that's it. It would 80 to 90% of the time it would happen at night, and we would have dinner, and I kind of would dread dinner because often there would be wine out, and my triggers would happen during meals, and just listening to her
Okay.
talk. And
The
there was a
voice and
the
the okay.
voice.
Yeah,
There was a
yeah.
quality to the voice, and I think I tried to describe it in my notes to you, a kind of a patronizing, with these hard consonants, like
Yeah, yeah,
long
yeah.
S's and T's. Like, sorry, I don't
Yeah.
want to trigger anyone,
Yeah,
but
yeah. It's okay.
uh, there were qualities of the voice
Right.
that would just drive me completely, just make my skin crawl.
And would that be part of the change into this other person, or was it
Oh
just
yeah,
around eating? She would always do that, but it was very, you could detect that something was,
it
bad things were coming if that consonant started to
yeah,
elongate and whatnot. Yeah. Okay.
and this often kind of centered around the dinner table.
Hmm.
The sun is starting to go down. The meal is on the table.
Wow.
Things are starting to kind of simmer a little bit, and the voice is kind of changing. It's getting a little more
Wow.
aggressive. The consonants are getting a little sharper. The S's are extending. The inflection is changing, and I would just skin crawling,
Wow.
just horrid, horrid stuff. And then often, uh, mom and dad would start fighting. over nothing.
Hmm.
But I think that I don't think my dad liked this other personality and didn't know how to deal with it, and they were very
Yeah.
combative. And
Yeah.
occasionally there was some physical stuff, not to downplay it, but mostly it was yelling and the voice.
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
often my mom would go up to her bedroom, and my dad would kind of either leave or sleep somewhere else in the
Yeah.
house.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think things are okay, but then I kind of learned to know that 2, 3 in the morning, I'm going to hear a chair hit a wall, or I'm going to hear a door slam, or I'm just going to hear screaming, like
Yeah.
out of utter silence in the night, suddenly just like screaming and cursing. Now,
Between
often
the two, or just her screaming, just on her
you
own.
know, that's an interesting. Well, but it would typically be just my mom.
Yeah.
Now, occasionally it would be fighting
Right.
between mom and dad, but often it was just her
Mm.
behind a closed door, remote from my room, behind multiple walls, but I could just hear this stuff going on and stuff hitting the wall or the door. I'd hear like the steps, boom, boom, and then the door slam I, out of out of the night, just
Right.
very suddenly. And she would always play music. She always had a record player. She would always put a record on. So I knew as soon as I heard music starting,
Oh, okay.
I knew what was coming after that. So she
Wow.
she
Okay.
in her whatever was going on thought, well, I'll put this record on and that'll kind of
Yeah.
cover everything up.
Wow.
And so
Okay.
so I think a lot of the math here for me is really easy to do, where you've got these components. You've got the music, you've got the slamming, you've got the voice, and like even the way she would chew would just be terrible. So kind of all the ingredients were there. um, and and I've always tried to kind of play detective. Like, was I, because I remember reacting to that stuff and reacting to her behavior, in tandem. So it gets into that chicken and egg thing. But I also remember, especially during my youth, being extremely annoyed by certain friends who would chew their food a certain way, and with the nasal thing going, would just, to other people, yeah, he eats annoying. But to
Right.
me, I would fixate on
So I was going to
it.
ask, like,
Like,
how, with all this stuff going on at night, then how did things transpire at school and with your friends? It sounds like, yeah, it started to proliferate into your social life.
well, I definitely kind of lived, I don't know, weirdly a double life, because
Mm.
I was often a withdrawn kid, but at the same time, I always had a lot of friends. I kind of learned to, I don't know, learn to live with all this weirdness going on without really talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, I remember some real depressive episodes, in middle school and high school. But also, I've always had close friends. A few of my friends I've had for, since
Hmm.
1986, and I was always one of these people who had, well, I have one friend, and this will sound like the Breakfast Club, but this is the
Yeah.
world I grew up in, where
Yeah.
I had a friend in the jocks, I had a friend in the artsy weirdos, and I was kind of the artsy weirdo, but also I ran with kind of the preppies, and I
That's interesting because
just
I was also one of those. Yeah, I can't say I was super withdrawn. I was introverted, but yeah, I seem to be the bridge between a bunch of different
that's it.
groups that wouldn't normally, like, I had, I was in this, the smarter kids group, but then I'd also hang out with, people of all kinds who are in, you know, remedial or uh, special ed, or, it's like
Yeah,
all over the place, or the jocks too. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know if that has anything to do with what we're, maybe
Well,
our, I don't know, ability to be observant, and maybe like you said, it kind of like oh, it's interesting, maybe like the fact that we are kind of hiding something, or we have this weird thing that we've got under the covers, that we're able to kind of like, shapeshift.
the
Maybe
shapeshift.
it's kind of like a trait that we have.
Yeah, and it I know for me it may kind of come with some of the feign response. I keep coming back to
Mm.
this freeze feign. I learned this in therapies now.
Can
I
you,
have to
yeah,
talk
can you
about it
just,
all the
well,
time,
yeah,
but like
actually,
it's
can you
one of
describe
those
feign?
people.
Because I was like, I know fight or flight, and then I recently added freeze, and now the feign thing is another new thing I gotta.
Well,
Can you maybe define that
yeah, well, I'm definitely no expert at any of this, but my understanding of it
for this
is,
hour? You are.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
My understanding of it is you kind of it has to do with peacekeeping and kind of
Mm.
pleasing other people. But when I really reflect on that, that wasn't how I was either. I wasn't this like really obsequious, I got to please everyone. If anything, I was
Yeah.
kind of the
Right.
opposite. But I liked making friends with a lot of different people. I liked, yeah, I think this is really interesting. And there's something about what you said, like the shape shifting, and there's something being concealed or misunderstood that I know that I I really loved hanging out with, and we get back to this word again, with kind of normal people who I perceived
Yeah.
as, well, these are very normal people.
Yeah.
So I had friends who were, quote unquote normal, but then I was also very much attracted to in the 80s, you'd call them the stoners or the shop kids or that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
kind of the
Ridgemont High kind of Fast Times at Ridgemont High kind of stoners and
yeah, but they were, always kind of drawing in their notebooks or writing poetry in their notebooks, and
oh,
and
okay,
they
the
were
artsies. Okay,
were a
yeah, I'm thinking
little
about something
artsy, and
different. Yeah, 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 yeah.
and we're maybe smoking some pot under the bleachers, and or they were a bit
Gotcha.
good. They were a bit gothy, and they dressed in, they had
Yeah.
a Misfits T-shirt on, or and
Right. Right.
so I really resonated with them at the same time,
Yep.
and maybe it had something to do with identifying with one group and kind of, but I want to be normal, and there's something so I want to be in a normal world. There were
Yeah.
these longings, I think,
Yeah.
that
Yeah. Yeah.
I was trying to, you know, bring together in some way.
And you were an only child, right? So you didn't,
Now I
while
have a
you were going
sister.
through it. You
I have a
do.
sister,
Oh, let's
and
get into that. What's going
yeah,
on there then?
well, she was older.
Yeah.
She's
Oh, okay.
she's older than me, and it's interesting because we were really close when I was really little,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of when things got really bad in the family,
Mm-hmm.
we couldn't really help each other. And she was old enough where she was more rebellious, and so she would just
Mm.
leave,
Mm. Like leave the
or
house, like
like
leave.
leave the house or run away. And
Yeah.
she was more capable of, since she was considerably older, she was able to leave the home sooner than I
Mm-hmm.
was,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
she was more combative with the parents, whereas I just kind of sunk into it
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
learned osmosis and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, for a long time we had a and then later in life, when our parents kind of became more of a, their health started really to decline and things got
Mm-hmm.
bad, that put a lot of strain on things. And
Mm-hmm.
but we really kind of came together, um, ultimately, and we now kind of take pride in being the healthy family
Okay.
that we always
Yeah.
wanted to be. Uh,
Yeah.
like we communicate constantly. We're very positive to each other. If we need help, we ask for it.
She
We,
knows about your misophonia and all this stuff,
you know,
or
we've I have probably overshared with my adventures in therapy and that kind of stuff. And
what does she
we have,
think?
well, together we have kind of, we talk about all this stuff now. we've kind of cracked it all open, and we share all of it. And I've told her about the therapy and, you know, my endless expertise on the nervous system now. But
Yeah.
but I've just partially because I'm really excited about some of the stuff I've been able to do because of the therapy, and I want to share it with her. And I can't really be a crusader for therapy for anyone, because I don't know what other people need. It worked for me pretty well, and I'm not saying I'm over anything, but it's a
right.
but
no, I don't mean right as in you're not over anything, but
yeah.
it's yeah, but I mean it helps. Just knowing that there's a path to understanding,
There's a path.
There's a explanation to things, a possible explanation that's at least good enough that can make you put your nervous system and hopefully at ease a little bit.
Yeah, it's tools in the toolkit, and it has helped demystify things a little bit, because I think people often deal with trauma. They feel really, bewildered, and or rightfully bewildered and frightened by what's happening in their body, and they want to get away from it, and so they kind of want to get separate from yourself. Like, this is so unpleasant. I don't want to think about this or deal with this. And there's a bit of black magic involved, where, like, okay, I'm hearing someone chew, or I'm hearing a door slam 10 doors down, and for the next 3 weeks I'm going to be a mess because that sounds utterly...
I know. It's hard to explain, and I think especially at our age, it's like we kind of probably just give up explaining to most people, because we just know we're going to get the blank stare, or the end of the conversation will end immediately.
It's like, so what else are you up to? Let's get off of this.
Like, oh, as soon as... okay, back away.
All right. Yeah, I'm not.
And meanwhile, we're like fascinated, like our
oh my god,
going, I
swear, when I found your podcast and started diving into it, I was just, one, it was great to feel some fellowship. Like, okay, this is something that I really can respond to, and I need it right now, and it's providing me with a feeling of fellowship and not being so alone, but also just endlessly fascinated by the particular triggers and how it makes people feel, and how long a episode will last if you get a flare up. It sounds like a foot fungus or something, like I'm having a flare up, but it's true. Like, I would have these flare ups, and it's so extreme, and you probably wouldn't be able to know it from the outside.
Right. Yeah.
Because
we're good at hiding that stuff.
What can you do?
Yeah.
And I remember, like, confronting my neighbors a couple times and trying to appear normal. And talk about a laugh riot. Talk about a comedy. I wish I would have had some footage of this, where I was trying to appear like, excuse me, I live next door, and could you please, or, in real life, I'm like, could you please turn your music, or don't sing your turn, and just like the Hulk was right there, not being successfully concealed. I don't know. I found that hilarious the couple times I tried that, and you try to be so, and it just breaks my heart listening to people who would, well, I had it with my dad, and it was so terrible that, we were estranged because of this craziness, and like I get it though.
So what are your maybe some of your coping mechanisms? Has the therapy helped in any kind of like a tangible way for you, or is it still relatively new? Like, how do you, how does Eric get live day to day?
Yeah. So, well, the the acoustic panels helped a lot. So it's funny because it's funny.
So you did, and you said in your note that you were living in downtown somewhere, and then you moved, like, so moving somewhere helped as well, right?
Absolutely. So,
And
so
then
the
is acoustic panels on top of that, or was that back in the city days?
those are back in the city days.
Okay, yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, so we lived in Portland, and it's interesting to think about how my misophonia really spiked around the time that life in Portland became really difficult.
Yeah, so it's like 2020 when there's like
Yeah.
kind of unrest and riots, whatever you want to call them,
Well,
everywhere. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of things kind of dovetailed, and obviously the pandemic, where a lot of people were trapped inside. Now I worked through most of that. I was one of the essential people, so but still, that obviously had an effect on people. And if you don't think your home is safe because of sound triggers, and you're trapped there all day to stew in those triggers, that's no good.
Yeah. Right.
And plus, just the general street life of Portland, the homeless stuff and the drug addiction, and it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had these additional triggers going on where I would often leave the house to feel safe,
Mm.
but then and I would go for a long walk. I would walk downtown, or I would walk here, walk there. The streets started not feeling safe. I had
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
had so many encounters. I lost count of how many unpleasant to real scary
Mm-hmm.
encounters I had.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what happened is I felt completely boxed in,
Yeah.
and we're talking about people with real mental health issues on the streets, screaming, sudden pivots of personalities, throwing stuff. So my
Sounds
sets of
familiar.
it sounds
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
familiar, and so I was dealing with it in the apartment, out on the street, and that kind of magnified everything. So I started learning about my window of tolerance, which is your area in your nervous system where you can handle things
Mm-hmm.
and not feel
Mm-hmm.
out of balance. And I think you can correlate it to a bandwidth, or I started thinking of it as a stress tank. Like
Mm-hmm.
my stress tank was so full that there was no, one drop would cause the overflow.
It has that, right. Can have a right disproportionate kind of effect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was this incredible confluence of stressors, not to make it all about me, all about me, but that's kind of what happened to me. Where okay, I've got these triggers that are bad. Now I go out in the street, and the street feels absolutely crazy, so I can't escape there. I got to go back inside. The neighbors slamming their door again. It scrambled my brain,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
and so what was interesting, that was around the time that I became so desperate that I found your podcast. And then I was like, okay, here's a word, here's here's a resource. And then I took that to my therapist, and I was like, I've got all these sound triggers going absolutely crazy. I think I share a lot of misophonia. I'm resonating every time I listen to one of these podcasts. I'm feeling like they're speaking directly to me. And so we started working on sound triggers, and then we started going back to some of those older memories that we had been working on.
Yeah.
And like I said, it didn't. This is not a magic bullet for me or for
Mm-hmm.
anyone. Like
Right.
this is like trimming your toenails or getting a haircut. You just have to keep after it forever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but part of my deal was, again, to get back to that freeze feign, where I would experience particularly these anger triggers, which would then immediately nosedive into hopelessness. So
Mm-hmm.
I would be charged with this fight or flight response, but then I would feel like, well, those aren't an option. So I'm going to crash into some depressive stuff, and I can't do anything. I can't do anything about any of this. And so that would
Yeah.
be the internal monologue of I'm helpless. I can't do anything. And then this sounds like such basic stuff, but I had to learn, like, well, what can I do about this? But when you're talking about like depressive dips, Like it
Mm-hmm.
saps your will to act or to live, or at least it did for me. And I was convinced, like, well, it doesn't matter what I do. I'm always going to be a slave to these triggers. It doesn't matter. I want to go to sleep. I'll sleep for 12 hours, you know,
Mm-hmm.
real depressive stuff. But then I eventually I came to this point where, like, well, I can take action. What can I do? And just I would start writing down options and making them real. Like I could put up, this is not going to take the trigger away, but it will help me live life if I have a little bit of money I can spend on these. I'm going to get
Right.
on Amazon and I'm going to order these panels and I'm going to panel the wall. And it helped. It made the trigger less. So I think for me, it's a combination of knowing, and eventually this impulse of what can you do? Well, I can also leave Portland. I can not, it's clear I don't like living at this apartment living. And me and my wife were actually getting around this time, actually getting ready to buy a house in Portland. And then
Mm-hmm.
it became
Mm-hmm.
clear that I don't want to live in Portland. I don't want to buy a house here. I got to get out of here. And so I had to overcome my feeling of I can't do anything. And we just had to decide we're going to move. We're going to move somewhere. We're going to find a place that feels safer, that's quieter. And lo and behold, we moved out of Portland. We still work in Portland, but we moved kind of out to the burbs,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and we found a place where we have one neighbor who's below us, and we have no surrounding neighbors, and we
Yeah,
live in
yeah,
this, and we just had to. I hate to use words like this, but had to manifest.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, what
yeah.
do I need to do to make this better? Because before I was convinced that I had to fix myself no matter what. And that comes from the freeze fame, where you have to sit here and learn to take anything. And that was kind of a core belief for me, was just you gotta learn to live with it. But at the ripe old age of 50, I'm like, well, I don't have to live with anything.
Yeah, yeah.
I
We're
can get the F out of here. I don't care what it looks like, what it takes. I'm out.
yeah, yeah. We've got an expiration date on us, so it's like
Yeah,
we we just got to make the most of it, and it's but getting getting maybe more realistic. It's because it's a combination of things. Like it's yeah, you're working, obviously you're working on yourself and working hard on yourself, but we gotta it's not doesn't it can't just all come from us, especially when I think there's such a deep well of history with you, and a lot of stuff to get over. I mean, you're not going to get over it overnight, and
yeah.
so it makes sense. You got to take practical like actions, like moving. Who cares? Just move, quit a job.
Just
Yeah,
just move.
it's like make those decisions, and in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big deal.
Yeah. No, it's
So
it's really not. But
especially when you're already going to move. So yeah,
yeah. But in that depressive mind or that anxious mind, you just kind of,
blame yourself.
like my
Yeah,
yeah, like my everyday self knows, like, yeah, I can move, I can change, but there's this other emotional thing going on where it's telling you no, you can't do anything. You're a slave to this, and
well, kind of swinging to to another aspect of the emotional side. When your parents passed away, you know how all the guilt and shame that we deal with
oh
for
sure,
for decades was did any of that, was there any kind of thinking about like that around the time, like yeah, did they know about misophonia? Did they care, before they died? Did you bring it up? Did you, I don't know, like, did you ever think about, oh, maybe I made their lives worse by, I don't know, how we kind of blame ourselves for reacting wrongly, and maybe that
sure.
amplifying their own issues. Was that a part of your thought process at all?
I kind of went down a lot of those roads.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What could I have done
What could I have done?
differently?
If I had just not had this misophonia, maybe I could have helped them, stuff like that.
Yeah,
Nonsense like that. I mean, it's obviously not your fault, but
Yeah. No, I definitely felt all those things. Um, and eventually I came to a pretty decent place where and just a real practical place. Like I did the best I could, like they did, all things considered. And I really became one of those people who, I got to focus on the positive.
Yeah,
I definitely had, I was gifted certain things through
yeah,
my childhood that I didn't have any control over. And, but also they raised someone who can take care of themselves,
mm-hmm.
and I always had a roof over my head, always had food. They exposed me to the arts. That's why I'm an artist now. Like
Yeah. I would like
they
to
were,
talk about that too, but yeah, yeah,
yeah,
maybe,
I
yeah,
mean, they were both artists, and my dad was an art teacher, and I had this real kind of incredible upbringing exposed to the arts, and so I can't just go down this black hole of, well, my parents are to blame for everything. Like, I'm 50 years old. I'm in charge of all this now.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. The
Like
statute of
the,
limitations is
it's
starting to pass on this,
it's
so
past. Like
yeah,
this is what I have. This is what I've been given, and do I make something of it, or do I just dig myself a hole and curl up? And I want to make something of it. So,
and
I mean,
how are you? Yeah,
part of that was reaching out to you. Like I don't know what people might get out of this, but just collectively listening to a lot of the episodes that I listened to, like I feel like it gave me something. It gave me a the ability to kind of take control of things a little bit,
mm-hmm.
to feel like I'm not alone, to not feel like such a weirdo, which is important if you're trying to grind through something and make progress. Like you gotta feel like there's other people out there
Yeah,
who can hear you or get something, even a little bit of boost of inspiration. Because I get it, from people and stories, and I look for it, or through the arts, or a book, a movie. You get little pieces of good stuff and inspiration, and I don't know.
yep. Where a lot of us are creative. How are you? Do you use misophonia in, I don't know, as an inspiration in any of your artwork? How are you using art? I guess is it? I mean, are you using it to kind of like as part of your coping overall with your mental health? Is it, or is it just whatever comes out?
I definitely look at the work. I was a real active artist in the kind of early to mid 2000s, and then I, being an artist is hard no
It's
matter
hard
what
work.
level
Yeah,
you're
yeah, yeah,
at. But I showed in some galleries and went to art
yeah.
fairs and stuff like that, and was real active. And then I kind of gave it up, and now I've been getting back into it the last couple of years, which which has been humbling, but it's what I need to do. But I look
Mm-hmm.
at the work I've done, and a lot of it is kind of, I don't know, this dark, weird artwork, and I can
Mm-hmm.
see, you know, the stuff we've been talking about in the work in some way. I see it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
where
yeah.
it's kind of dealing with mortality and destabilized. Uh, I mean, I do a lot of portraits that these people look like they're simultaneously alive or dead, or very
Yeah,
ordered
yeah, yeah.
and very chaotic at the same time, if that makes sense, and kind of positive and negative at the same time. So I can see these impulses going into the work, real obviously for me, because I've
Yeah.
always, I was always kind of a kid who was fascinated with. I used to go to this video store called Flicks and Picks
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
back in the VHS days, and I would rent all these dark art movies and David Lynch movies or Ken Russell movies, and I would just feed on that stuff. The darker the better, and
I
because
just picked up a
something.
vinyl copy of the Elephant Man soundtrack, so
Oh, are you serious?
it's
I
interesting. Yeah,
I just got
and I
that
have
blue.
Eraserhead. Apparently, I mean, Eraserhead is got all kinds of odd noises. The audio of that film is really bizarre, and
Well,
so
that's interesting because David Lynch, most of his films are the sound design is
hmm
very particular and
hmm
often very ominous and strange. Yeah.
So there's a interesting. There's a I love going on tangents, but there is a I found a PhD that someone wrote, and actually the author I recently found out. I started following her on Twitter, but she also has misophonia. But she wrote, her PhD was on the sound of the noise and sound design of Eraserhead in
Oh,
particular. Or
really?
was it an article she wrote? I'll cut this out. It was something she wrote about it. But yeah, it's fascinating. I'm fascinated by um it, sound and noise in art and music. Um, not just the usual like ambient kind of stuff, but kind of purposeful.
Yeah.
And the idea of maybe actually somebody who actually somebody I recorded who I think is going to be going live this week, but he is a composer who actually has incorporated his triggers into some of his music, which
Oh
I
my
think is also
God.
fascinating. So
Yeah, that's kind of heavy.
yeah. But anyways, we're going on a tangent. But let's talk about your art. But yeah,
Yeah, well,
so you've gone back into it, and
I've gone back into it, and I've kind of picked up where I've left off, where
hmm
I did I get these yeah, I just do these figures that are, and I do a lot of kind of businessmen or very official looking people
hmm
who are being distorted or kind of uh, almost melted by their environments,
yeah, I love it. Yeah.
and are kind of interacting. I don't know. They're very dark, but they're also kind of funny
hmm
and optimistic. I'm fascinated by the idea of the memento mori, the reminder of death,
hmm
where you know, kind of old school artists would incorporate a kind of a skull into a painting, or a distorted
hmm
skull that you could see in a mirror or from a certain perspective or something. And there was a kind of a tradition called the memento mori, where it's reminding you that you're going to die now,
hmm hmm
but in a way that so that you can enjoy what's going on now, but kind of
Oh, gotcha.
have this synthesis and this
Yeah.
knowledge that this is all finite, and so you should probably start enjoying your life now because it's
Right.
all gonna end. It sounds so dark, but I find it really, and I've kind of starting to make peace with that idea for myself. I don't know about you, but when I was younger, I thought it was immortal. I mean,
Yeah, we all do. Yeah, you don't think about your health going or having to.
none of that stuff. But
Yeah.
I've bumped up, finally in my life with health issues. Beyond mental health challenges. Just my back, my
hmm
my just my
Yeah.
knees hurt. I have to get a colonoscopy. Just this mundane
hmm
physical
hmm
stuff, and it kind of is piled up enough to let me know that I am actually going to die.
Yeah.
And I've went.
Yeah.
Both of my parents have died. I have spread their ashes. They used to be people, and now they are just ashes. And you get old enough, you start really just it becomes this real everyday fact.
Do you ever, when you're thinking about that stuff, do you ever then suddenly get triggered and think about, wait a minute, that's just a sound. I should not be getting triggered about that when I should be thinking about death. But we always do. I mean,
We always
it's the
do.
fascinating thing is, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No,
So
yeah, I've definitely tried to contextualize,
yeah,
all the
it's
sound triggers. Like I gotta
it's
get over
hard.
this, but in the moment, it's so convincing, it's so powerful that it's what can you do? You can do your best when it happens, and yeah, but artwork is a kind of a way to talk about these issues and to think about death and impermanence and just chaos.
hmm
My work deals with chaos too, which is something I kind of grew up with, and weirdly got comfortable with. And
It sounds like you're peeling those layers back, though, at least, and hopefully, yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're getting a better and better understanding of what's going on, and
yeah, well, it's, and I know a lot of. Sorry, I stepped on you there, but
no.
it's like people with miso, like it's hard not to be hard on yourself,
Right.
and or to think something's wrong with you, and to be really hard on yourself, and to be critical of yourself. And I'm trying to relax more and more with that kind of stuff. Like, well, I'll wake up tomorrow and do the best I can with it, and I'll chip away at it, because I used to just hope that I could conquer these triggers. All right, I'm going to put these acoustic panels up, and that'll be it, and I'll be over my miso. And I would apply this weird pressure because the symptoms are so desperate.
Right.
But now I just kind of, age kind of relaxes things. Like, well, I'll give it another go tomorrow. It gets a little bit better every time, and sometimes a new trigger comes up that I didn't know about, but I'll deal with that one too. I'll figure it out.
Do you have the visual triggers as well too? I would imagine, like misokinesia kind of stuff, like watching people eat and
Thankfully,
seeing somebody close the door, maybe not.
Thankfully, no.
No, okay.
No,
cool.
it's all, it's
Acoustic.
audio.
Yeah,
It's acoustic, and the thing with the headphones, like, I thought I should bring that up. When back in the day when I would hear these family patterns emerging, I started, and this was back in the Walkman days, where you had the cassette Walkman.
So kids, those were when you had a cassette that you'd shove into your phone. Imagine shoving a cassette into your phone, and then the phone didn't do anything else.
Picture it if you can.
It might have a radio, yeah.
And these gigantic fat buttons that would click when you push them. And you had these headphones that had bright orange foam.
If your iPhone was made out of Lego, that's what a Walkman looked like, and didn't have much more technology in it.
Yeah, incredible. But I started wearing Walkmans every night, and I was one of those people who would join the Columbia House Record Club.
Oh yeah, BMG, Columbia House, yeah.
Yeah, all of that, and get 24 cassettes for 1 penny, and then pay later.
Yeah.
So I would lay there in bed in 1985, with a Lionel Richie or
Can't Slow Down or Dance on the Ceiling. Yeah,
Dance on the Ceiling. A little Phil Collins, No Jacket Required.
Studio, yeah.
To get
I have
through
all
the
that
night.
stuff on vinyl. Yeah.
Well, Huey Lewis, Sports.
Yeah, Sports.
Whitney Houston 1 and 2, on and on. But yeah, that became that was my first coping mechanism, was a Walkman, and I would wear them every night, and I wear earbuds every night to sleep, and that kind of became the way for me to go to sleep. And now, it's funny, particularly when we live in this new place where I have minimal triggers. And it's taken me a few months to decompress and to get rid of the anticipatory stuff that I had going on. But I still put earbuds in no matter what. And I put a podcast in, or some ambient, Vangelis or whatever.
Which I also have a vinyl too. But,
excellent. Perfect.
There's some great Spotify playlists where it really just kind of, you can just leave it on and it's great to go to sleep, or just have while you're reading, or synth washes, or or some gently tinkling chimes. We'll do the trick. What about your people around you, like your wife, like how your other close friends? What do they think? Have they gotten used to it?
So my friends they understand it, but they don't understand it. They realize that
we all understand that.
Yeah. It's they kind of okay, they can conceptualize it. My wife has witnessed me enough to know, to really kind of digest, and she's very empathic, what do you call it? And
HSP, like
she's
a highly sensitive person,
well,
or
she will really feel what I'm feeling,
mm,
and if she sees me, suffering or ruminating on something, she'll very much, absorb it and want to try to help with it, which makes me so really frustrating because you really feel helpless. Like you can't. I'm sorry, you can't help me. There's, and and often the help is, I'm sorry, dear, but I'm going to put these headphones on and block everything out and be a stranger in the home. That's not always great.
right.
But she's experienced the stuff enough, and has helped me. Like when we put those acoustic pads up, she made. We went and got some little art stamps and just did decorative stamps, and that was her idea to let's make something positive out of this. But I still, and I give myself misophonia. I'm also concerned when I slam a door too loud.
Okay, yeah.
We have one of those really loud Vitamix blenders that just sounds like an engine taking off, and I just cringe when I use it because I don't want to disturb anyone,
right,
or trigger it. So I kind of project my triggers out.
We have one of those too. It's but it's I feel like it's enough of a white noise that it kind of. But I know what you're saying. When it starts to rev up, I'm like,
oh god,
I don't remember how loud it's gonna get.
And I start getting, we moved into this new place, and we met our neighbor. He's this really cool guy, and I was just effusive with like, if we ever make any noise, please let me know. Just overly, overly explaining myself without really getting into it. But
right.
But my wife will definitely trigger me when she's using the blender, or we moved into this new place, and like the cabinet doors are really loud when they close. So of course, what did I have to do?
The soft close. Yeah.
I got the soft close. I went to every cupboard in this place and softened them all up because I was cringing. And again, like she doesn't really even notice it.
Yeah.
And I'll be in the other room just cringing, like as if I'm being hit or something. It's really strange.
Yeah. Or it's kind of like you're that little boy again.
Yeah. So. It really is as cheesy as that, where it's, I mean, it would make kind of a bad movie, but it's true. Like the past does stay with you and trigger you. And
right. Well, Eric, I've kind of pleasantly lost track of time, but we
ripped off an hour and a half, I think.
Yeah. No, this has been great, but I still want to give you a chance to like any. I know you had all these notes and you have some shorthand. Anything else you want to share with people now? And you can always come back again in the future. But anything else you want to get off your chest and share with people and see what people think about?
I think, amazingly, I kind of got most
of
this stuff out. It feels like so much, but just I wanted to make sure to say that or be one of these people where you got to go to therapy. I don't want to be one of those people, but it definitely helped me at least mediate some of the effects of misophonia, and like everyone, my triggers are tailored to me and my history and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like there is help out there, and it took me a while to find it. And I don't know if it would work for anyone else, but I really liked. It was a miserable experience. The phrase, getting into these triggers and kind of hacking into them. And they're not solved, but I did find some solace with kind of body-based hacking into the nervous system to at least soften some of the distress of sound triggers.
The sensomotor stuff that you're talking about?
Yeah. And that might not be for everyone, and talk therapy is really difficult, and especially if you got heavy trauma and stuff, and everyone can find different types of help. But I didn't solve it, but I got some wiggle room now.
Yeah.
And some
That's
abilities
huge.
I didn't have before.
Yeah.
And go to Amazon.com, and they've got these panels that they make for musicians, and you can plaster your whole house with
Are those did you get the Oralex or did you get another?
I don't even remember. They were just kind of these. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the actual manufacturer.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, there's all kinds of companies that make like that foam for musicians. Those everyone kind of recognize what they look like. Those, triangular kind of foam thingies. So, or just put, you could also start by putting blankets up, in strategically placed blankets, or other kind of material, rugs maybe.
Yeah.
But if you want to go really cheap, but yeah, these foam panels are specifically made for musicians and audio.
I mean, sorry, I'm laughing. It sounded like I'm making a joke out of it, but it did help me. And the answer is not to insulate yourself from the world, but also you got to give yourself as much breathing room as you can. And if you're trying to get over some of this stuff, you need to give your nervous system a break.
Yeah.
So you can get strong. And not feel constantly under attack.
Yeah.
So you can pool your resources a little bit, and if you got to put up some blankets, and hopefully you have a partner or a family or whoever you live with who understands.
Yeah, and I would say just try stuff. Don't feel like
try stuff.
You don't feel like you're not going in the right direction, because what I tell people is like, misophonia is so little understood and so made fun of that we just gotta do it. We're gonna help each other out.
We gotta pool our. We gotta crowdsource this stuff, and just try stuff, tinker with it. Like if it seems ridiculous and maybe something doesn't work, try something else, and just chip away at it.
Yep.
There's ways.
And then come on the podcast and let us know what's worked and what hasn't, because not a lot of people are researching. Not enough people are researching this.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Just come on and testify. And
well, Eric, I mean, this was as amazing as I thought it would be, and I want to thank you for coming on and just sharing like some heavy stuff. And I'm glad that you are now have a name for it and are going to therapy and starting to pick at it. And I know you're going to keep working on it. I would love to keep in touch with you. Obviously, we're not connected on social.
Same here.
I think this is just the beginning. But yeah, let's share things with each other as much as we can. Good luck to you.
And I know other people have told you this, but what you do is a big deal. I mean, I've kind of stumbled my way into becoming a mental health advocate and advocating for just being open about it. Yeah, it's painful stuff, but just get it out there, demystify it. You're not a weirdo, you're not insane, just it's a practical thing in your life, and just deal with it, share it. So thank you for having something out there for people to do that with, because that's a big deal. So that's cool.
Thank you, Eric, and I really look forward to doing that follow-up interview with you later this season. If you liked this episode, don't forget to leave a quick review, or just hit the 5 stars wherever you listen to this podcast. You can hit me up by email at hello@misophonicpodcast.com, or go to the website misophonicpodcast.com. It's even easier just to send a message through Instagram at misophonicpodcast. Follow there, or on Facebook at Misophonia Podcast, and we're even on Twitter at Misophonia Show. Support the show by visiting the Patreon at patreon.com/Misophonia Podcast. Theme music, as always, is by Moby. And until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.